All right, y'all. Moving away from agencies. Restatement of agency. I did not mention that we have to go over restatement of restitutions. And this is a short one. This is a one-off. Might be considered filler, but it's not. And restatement of restitution, we'll start with kind of like restitution. And if you think about like the word restitution, I think it's kind of instructive, like payback, right? Like if I demand restitution for harms that have been done unto me, I'm asking for payback. And the statement of restitutions is essentially that. Now, where I think I initially got tripped up with is accidentally mixing restitution with estoppel, promissory estoppel, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. But I think it does bear mentioning because it was helpful for me that restitution, restitution, and promissory estoppel, estopid is restitution is for unjust enrichment. Okay. Not only that, but it was previously known as quasi or sometimes called quasi contracts. So that implies that not like a full contract was there. Um, but the big difference, I think, like in my head, is that for promissory estoppel, you need reliance. Okay. Reliance that was reasonably understood to be induced, right? You don't need reliance here. Okay. So reliance, boom, you don't need reliance. And so there's going to be unjust, well, no, there over here as well, you don't need, let me put this, unjust enrichment, right? Um, like you don't need unjust enrichments. Like an injustice is required for promissory estoppel, but somebody doesn't necessarily need to be unjustly enriched, as a matter of fact. So, kind of painting this picture, I think even doing this right now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a big difference, right? Um, and so when looking at restitution, nobody necessarily relied on it. I mean, in some instances, in some of the cases, like they didn't rely, they were kind of like forced in some ways. Sometimes they're not. I mean, sometimes like they just didn't carry their end of the deal. Right. And yeah, hopefully that was helpful for y'all. Um, so for me, and it's all about restitution. Okay. So, section one, restitution and unjust enrichment. Short, a person who is unjustly enriched at the expense of another is subject to liability in restitution. Essentially what I said here. Keywords, unjust enrichment. And so the example maybe I would give is, let's say a deal went down where two parties, said, if you babysit my nephew, for a year, I'll pay you at the end of the year. Okay. And then they follow through, they do all that and then they don't pay at the end of it. That would be unjust enrichment for sure. Section two, limiting principles. And so it's four subsections. One, the fact that a recipient has, so these are kind of mitigating things. These are like clarifying that there's a lot of things that feel like they're going to need restitution, but if they fall into these categories, they're actually not, subject to restitution. So one, the fact that a recipient has obtained a benefit without paying for it does not of itself establish that a recipient has been unjustly enriched. Okay. So just because you get something for free, or just because something is given for free, so to speak, or without like another, right? it doesn't mean it's unjust enrichment. So I don't know, man. Like, let's say there's like a deal, right? You guys had a deal, and then on the side they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I decided to like wash your car." Um, as you know, part of the deal. It's like we didn't agree on that, and it's like, I mean, just because you got it, right, doesn't mean it's unjust enrichment. Two, a valid contract defines the obligations of the parties as to matters within its scope, displacing to that extent any inquiry into unjust enrichment. This is real short. Real short. If there's a contract, run the contract. Okay. No contract, then like or quasi contract, then we might look into restitution. But if there is one and we could define it, remember, offer, acceptance, consideration, run it. Then run breach of contract. Don't turn to restitution. There is no liability in restitution for an unrequested benefit voluntarily conferred unless the circumstances of the transaction justify the claimant's intervention in the absence of a contract. So my language here, restitution is not available for unrequested voluntary benefits given unless the circumstances justify it. So if we take out this section real quick, restitution is not available for unrequested voluntary benefits given, right? And we just cut out this clause. Simply put, just be like, if somebody didn't ask for something and they were given the benefit and then expects them to pay afterwards, it doesn't count. So I can't just go over to every one of my neighbors' lawns, start mowing it, knocking on their door and be like, you owe me 20 bucks. Okay. There are situations, and this is where this unless comes in, where it may require, even though the person did not consent to it. And so the instances that come to mind are if you are, if your foot was amputated on the sidewalk and you just needed an EMT to, take you to the hospital, and, maybe in your head, you're like, I can't afford this. But you, they take you anyway, and you're unconscious because you're in shock. Then afterwards, even though you didn't consent to it, you were most likely going to have to pay anyway. Because, I mean, I don't know, there's fear of like you bleeding out to death, right? Last one, number 4. Liability and restitution may not subject an innocent recipient to a forced exchange. In other words, an obligation to pay for a benefit that the recipient should have been free to refuse. So in other words, kind of like 3, kind of not. But you can't force an innocent party to do a forced exchange when the benefit ought to have been free to refuse. So this is like the lawnmower thing. Like, I mowed your lawn, you owe me. Like, if I had the chance to refuse it, I would have refused it. So it doesn't count. Okay. Yeah, I mean, before I leave this episode, I'm gonna go over the elements of restitution. In this, I saved the good stuff for last. This is what you really need here, because they have to satisfy all of these elements in order for restitution to have a chance to being there. Okay, and this is from court cases, but essentially, element one, a benefit is given. Okay, 2 is that the other party, the defendant, knows of the benefit. Okay, so A gave a benefit to B. B knows that they got a benefit. B or D, the defendant, continues to keep the benefit. Like, they're like, oh, thanks for the benefit, and I keep it, right? And the last one is it's inequitable to retain the benefit. And so let's say like they gave the benefit because they had like some conversations or something about an exchange, and they're like, no, I'm just going to keep it. Like, that would be inequitable for sure. Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be other restitution parts that I will need to include, because I haven't gotten notice that I need other ones. This is just from the notes and my notes and slides. So if there is, I may have to make a supplemental to restitutions, but I don't know. We didn't spend that much time, so I don't know. Fingers crossed.